Forbidden love, 80-year-old woman and 18-year-old boy. Love story at the Lyon market in Greenwich Village, where every exposed brick building holds 1,000 secrets. Evelyn Hayes was a legend. A former NYU literature professor, now in her 80s. She was the literary godmother of the market. But the intellectual buzz around him was replaced by another kind of gossip. The reason? Adam. Adam was the young man who ran the organic fruit stand. He was in his early 20s with perpetually messy hair, artist's hands, and a slow smile that made women of all ages stop. He was also a musician. The scandal began innocently enough. Evelyn was buying apples. But soon, customers noticed that her purchases were taking a long time. To the market's close-knit community, the intimacy was blatant. Sal, the owner of the Italian deli, watched over his glasses. "He makes her laugh," Sal murmured to a customer. "But what else is he doing?" The line between caution and calculation seemed thin. They saw sensuality. They saw the way he helped her carry her bags, not like a gentleman, but like a companion. They saw the way she looked at him as he recited Walt Whitman, not with admiration, but with adoration. The gossip was poisonous. He was a con man targeting her apartment on West 12th Street. She was a senile old woman, blinded by the last spark of desire. The social pressure had become a thick fog that hung over the market. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow cooling, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Evelyn's easy laughter, which used to echo through Sal's deli as she debated cheeses, disappeared. It was replaced by a tense silence, a stare lost in space as she pretended to inspect the apples at Adam's stall. Adam himself, once radiant and full of musical energy, now moved with hunched shoulders, the weight of unspoken accusations visible in his posture. The fruit stand, that vibrant little stage for their poetic exchanges, became a place to be avoided. Regular customers, those who had bought their organic fruit there for years, now looked away, mumbling apologies, preferring to buy their vegetables at other stalls. The sweet smell of ripe fruit, peaches, and blackberries now seemed charged with a bitter note of judgment. People no longer saw an elderly teacher and a talented young musician. They saw a sordid transaction. The sensuality they imagined, the casual touch of his hand in hers as he handed her change, the way he leaned in to read Whitman on his phone, it was all twisted into a narrative of predatory exploitation. But the real blow, the blow that turned the rumor into a legal weapon, came from within. Evelyn's nephew, Jason, a ruthless midtown wealth management lawyer, a man who saw his aunt not as family, but as a portfolio of assets that was being dangerously mismanaged. He didn't call. He didn't send a polite letter. He came to the market. He made his way through the lunchtime crowd, his expensive suit serving as armor against the bohemian world of the village, and stopped in front of Adam's stall. There, in the middle of the crowded market, he handed Evelyn the official papers. The scene was the official trigger that plunged their relationship into an abyss. When Adam tried to intervene, telling her she didn't have to accept this, Jason shoved him back, a gesture of contempt that the entire market witnessed. They were cold legal documents, a petition for an emergency psychiatric evaluation, and a request for guardianship. The word conservatorship hung in the air, ugly and brutal. Jason alleged undue influence, vulnerability to manipulation, and cognitive impairment. He wasn't just trying to nullify a relationship. He was trying to seize total control, erase Evelyn's autonomy, legally silence her in her own life. The market, once a community haven, became a public tribunal, and the verdict had already been handed down. Evelyn's look as she read the document expressed a betrayal and desperation that silenced even the most vicious gossipers. She watched her nephew, the boy she helped raise, use the law to destroy her. From that moment on, Evelyn was effectively confined to her apartment by court order, awaiting the evaluation that would decide her fate. Adam was publicly ostracized. His stall became an island that customers skirted. He was, in everyone's eyes, the predator who had been caught. But despite the hostility, Adam didn't abandon her. The community now had a document to justify their judgment, but Adam had a promise. Discreetly every morning before the market fully opened, he would leave a small basket of fresh fruit at her door. Alongside it was a single note, no longer Whitman's poems, just a simple sentence: "They know nothing. Eat the berries. And hours later she would slip a reply under the door on a napkin. There is still beauty, my young poet. Beauty always exists. This was their only threat of resistance. For Jason, who undoubtedly had informants watching, these gestures were further proof of Adam's sinister influence. For them, it was the only breath of air in a world trying to suffocate them, unaware that the truth of their connection lay not in literature, but in years of silence and an act of courage no one there could have imagined. But what Jason, with his calculator instead of a heart, what Sal, with his snap judgment at the deli, and what the rest of New York could never know, was that Evelyn and Adam's bond had nothing to do with the seductive cadence of Whitman's poetry. It wasn't about desire, nor the cynical exploitation of an elderly woman's loneliness. The intimacy the market saw as sensual was, in fact, something else entirely. Their bond wasn't based on literature. It was based on fire, on screams, on the smell of kerosene, and on a promise made half a century earlier, halfway around the world, amid the collapse of a nation. The secret wasn't in the literature books Evelyn taught at New York University. It was in her youth, a part of her life she had locked away. In 1975, during the desperate and chaotic fall of Saigon, Evelyn Hayes wasn't a renowned professor. She was an idealistic young volunteer at the American Embassy, just in her early 20s, trying to process visas amidst absolute panic. The air was thick with smoke, and the deafening sound of Huey helicopters circling overhead. It was the end of a world. Desperate crowds pressed against the barbed wire gates, reaching out, begging for a way out. It was in this hell of fear that a young Vietnamese mother, her face etched with exhaustion and terror, was pushed by the crowd toward Evelyn. The woman, thin and alone, was clearly ill, barely able to stand, and carried a starving baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. She knew she wouldn't make it through the gates. She knew she wouldn't survive. As the Marines formed a perimeter, the mother, named Lynn, grabbed Evelyn's arm with a strength that belied her frailty. Her eyes met Evelyn's, and in that instant, a desperate transfer occurred. Lynn didn't ask to be saved. She made Evelyn promise. "If I can't make it," she begged in broken English, "take care of him. His name is Bao, please." She quickly removed a small jade amulet from her own neck and placed it on the sleeping baby. Before Evelyn could respond, the crowd surged forward again. Lynn was swallowed up in the chaos, disappearing forever, a ghost in the smoke. Evelyn, in shock, protected the baby, using her American passport to secure a seat on the last helicopter to take off from the roof. She managed to get Bao to California, to the refugee camps at Pendleton Air Force Base. But the chaos only changed shape. The baby was sick, with a high fever. Amidst the bureaucracy and crowded medical tents, Bao was taken to an emergency treatment ward. When Evelyn returned hours later, he had been transferred, and then lost. The overwhelmed system placed him in emergency adoption. Evelyn lost him. She, who never married, who never had children of her own, lived the rest of her life with the weight of that broken promise. Lynn's face and Bao's cries haunted her nights for over 40 years. She searched for him for decades, using every resource her academic career afforded her. But the trail was cold, the records non-existent. Until one day at Greenwich Market, she stopped to buy peaches. The young vendor smiled at her, and then she saw it. Hanging from a faded chain on his wrist, mixed with other leather bracelets, was a small jade amulet. She asked his name. Adam. She asked his age. It was a perfect match. His eyes were the same as Lynn's. The poetry, lessons, the insistence on buying fruit only from him, the intimacy the market deemed sensual. It was Evelyn, awkwardly trying to reconnect, trying to find a way to fulfill a promise made in the fire over 40 years ago. She wasn't being seduced. She was trying, finally, to be the guardian she swore to be. The hearing took place in a stuffy room in Manhattan Probate Court, one of those places where the sunlight seemed to have given up, leaving an atmosphere heavy with dust and anxiety. The wooden chairs creaked. Jason, impeccably dressed in his dark suit, sat next to his lawyer, looking serene and confident. On the other side, Evelyn, visibly frail under the weight of the proceedings, but with a spark of defiance in her eyes, was accompanied by a public defender. Adam was present, called as a witness, his heart pounding against his ribs, the smell of old nail polish and paperwork irritating his nostrils. The judge, a middle-aged man with thin glasses, leafed through the documents with exasperating slowness. In a firm, articulate voice, Jason's lawyer began to present his case. He described his aunt's vulnerability, painting a picture of cognitive decline and desperate loneliness. He then took aim at Adam, describing the undue influence. He cited the secret notes, the daily fruit baskets, Evelyn's insistence on unnecessary lessons with the young man. Every word was a weapon, reinforcing the stigma already hanging over them. He insinuated the improper nature of their attachment, using the very intimacy the market deemed sensual as evidence of manipulation. Evelyn listened, her head held high but her fingers trembled slightly on the fabric of her dress. When the lawyer turned to her, seeking to further discredit her, he questioned her memory, her judgment. "Mrs. Hayes, with all due respect," he began, his voice dripping with false compassion. "Doesn't your advanced age make you susceptible to forgetfulness? To confusion? This attachment hasn't clouded your judgment?" Evelyn took a deep breath. A distant, almost ancestral expression took over her gaze. "Sir," she began, her voice gaining an unexpected strength that silenced the room. "There are things the memory retains with a clarity that time cannot erase, and there are promises the heart never forgets." And then, with surprising calm, she began to tell him, not about the market, not about poetry, but about Saigon in 1975. She spoke of the shadow of the occupation, the fear, the chaos at the embassy gates, the sound of helicopters, and the cold morning smoke. The judge and the lawyers looked confused, impatient. Jason shook his head, a slight sneer on his lips, certain she was proving her case for senility. Adam, however, felt a chill. He had never heard her speak of the past with such intensity. "One day," Evelyn continued, her voice choked with pent-up emotion, "a young mother with a baby in her arms knocked on my door, desperate. She described her escape, her days in hiding, and her final promise at the embassy gate. She made me promise, if I don't survive, take care of him. His name is Bao." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. The judge removed his glasses. Jason's lawyer tried to interrupt, claiming it was irrelevant, but the judge silenced him with a gesture. "I never had children," Evelyn said, her voice now thick with emotion, "but that promise became my life's goal. I searched for him for decades." She paused and looked at Adam. "And then one day, at the market, there he was, with the same eyes as the mother I lost, and wearing the same jade amulet she described to me." She turned to the judge. "That baby was Adam, my Adam." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Jason's face contorted in shock and disbelief. His lawyer gaped, stunned. Adam, teary-eyed, was overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. The truth of his origins, his mother's sacrifice, Evelyn's unwavering loyalty. It was as if a veil had been ripped from his life. Their relationship, seen as a sham, was instantly recontextualized. It was neither seduction nor fraud, but a moral debt, a maternal love forged in the chaos of war, a promise fulfilled through decades of searching. Jason's lawyer, stuttering, tried to recover. This is absurd. Where's the evidence?" Evelyn calmly opened her purse and took out an old bound diary. "My diary from 1975, she said, handing it to the clerk. "In it, I wrote down the details of that fateful day, the mother's name, and the description of the amulet." The scene, intended to be Adam's conviction, turned the trial into a profound and painful coming to terms. The revelation spread through the village faster than any rumor. But this time, it was a firestorm of shame and admiration. Jason, confronted with the diary's irrefutable evidence, withdrew his petition. His reputation, however, was tarnished by greed. The market community was mortified. Sal, the deli owner, felt a lump in his throat. The next morning, he hadn't just bought Adam's fruit. He'd brought Evelyn the best cannoli in his shop, his eyes welling up, and he'd mumbled an apology. The relationship between Evelyn and Adam blossomed openly. Adam, now with a past, felt a deep gratitude. The woman he saw as a mentor was, in reality, his only connection to the mother he never knew. He began writing, not just poems, but his own story. With Evelyn's help, he began piecing together his identity, a manuscript he called The Saigon Promise. Greenwich Market, once a courtroom, became a shrine to their history. The now famous fruit stand was a silent reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that true human stories are rarely seen at first glance. Their bond, forged in the chaos of war and tested by gossip, was finally seen for what it was. Not a scandal, but an act of loyalty that took decades to complete.